In this video, I'm going to be ranking Donald Trump's running mate choices or vice president choices from worst to first. And this video is not based off of who I think Donald Trump would pick, but this video is actually based off of who I think will do the best to make or help Donald Trump win. Just a heads up there. So, starting off with the worst tier, the F tier, horrible and avoid. So, Donald Trump should avoid Kari Lake because I think she's a horrible candidate as his vice president. Not saying I think she's a horrible person or a horrible politician. Well, she's not really a politician. But I think he should avoid Kari Lake, and he is considering actually picking her. And those are rumors that very well could likely be true. And knowing Donald Trump, he actually could very well pick Kari Lake as his running mate or vice president. So I think Kari Lake has a high chance of being Donald Trump's running mate or vice president. But this video is based off of who I think will help Donald Trump win. And when it comes to helping Donald Trump win, I think Kari Lake would be good for Donald Trump, but not good to make him win. I think Donald Trump would actually most likely, or there's a good chance he does pick Kari Lake, in my opinion. I think there's a good chance he does. He said he was considering it as well. And knowing Donald Trump, he probably will, because she is, I would say, a comedian, and she is not a politician. And I would say that's what Donald Trump likes, because Kari Lake matches Donald Trump's personality style, I would say. So in terms of the likelihood of Trump actually picking Kari Lake, that is very high. I think he actually will, or the chances are high. But when it comes to the quality of it, of helping Donald Trump win the votes, I think she's the worst. And considering that she lost in Arizona, I mean, barely, but she should have still won it. Like, let's be for real here. Doug Ducey won it by double digits, and she comes out losing. Like, come on. I don't think so. So, worst tier for Kari Lake. But I think she is likely to be Donald Trump's running mate, considering Donald Trump, you know him, and he likes to pick outsiders and, whatnot. And I think she's a good pick for Donald Trump, but she's not a good pick in terms of getting some voters for Donald Trump. So the next tier is the C tier. We're going to skip D tier. It goes from F, C, B, and A at best. So F is the worst tier. A is the best tier. So now on to the C tier, which is the average choices. We have Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, and Ron DeSantis are in the C tier, which I think Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, and Ron DeSantis, all three of them are pretty much average, and they're pretty much decent. I would say somewhere in the middle. So they're not horrible candidates, and they're definitely not the best candidates. So let's start off with Tim Scott. I think if Donald Trump were to pick Tim Scott as his running mate or vice president, I think there's definitely a chance. But will he is the question. I just don't see it as of right now. Maybe as we get closer to the Republican primaries, or when we do hit the Republican primaries in August, maybe Donald Trump would consider picking Tim Scott. But I think if he does pick Tim Scott, I think where Tim Scott does seem to help Donald Trump is by, I would say, winning some of the black African-American support and taking them from the Democrats, because back in 2020, 9 out of 10 African-Americans voted for Joe Biden. So if Tim Scott would be Trump's running mate, I think he can definitely help in terms of stealing or taking away some of the African-American votes from Biden that voted for him in 2020. And Tim Scott would help Trump with the African-American support, especially in Georgia. I think Tim Scott, where Tim Scott can really be effective, is in Georgia. If Tim Scott is the running mate for Donald Trump, I think he can take away some of the votes from the African-American communities that voted for Biden in 2020 and make them turn out for Donald Trump. So I think Tim Scott, where he really is most effective for Donald Trump's running mate, is in Georgia, and he will take away some of the African-American votes from Biden, and he will take some votes and put them for Donald Trump, which I think he could be effective there and help him win Georgia, possibly. So that's where I think Tim Scott really is effective. Otherwise, I think he's pretty much average and he's decent. So, and then now we have Ron DeSantis. I actually think that it's unlikely that Trump does, because he's been really not liking DeSantis ever since he announced his run. And that's one thing that makes me think he's not going to pick DeSantis. And another thing, which is the main thing, is that Trump has to change his residency from Florida. He has to move from Florida. Well, he has to change his residency in order to pick DeSantis, because DeSantis is also from Florida. So that's also unlikely. But I would say DeSantis is not that bad because, I mean, he's DeSantis and Floridians like him, so he's not that bad. But when it comes to Trump's VP, I think it's unlikely. Number one, Trump has to change his residency. Number two, Trump doesn't like DeSantis as much as he used to ever since he announced his run. So I think DeSantis is pretty much average. He's not the worst. He's definitely not the best. And it's hard to beat Trump's. And it's hard. It's hard for Trump to pick DeSantis because, like I said, he has to change his residency, and I don't think he will. So at the end of the day, I don't think Ron DeSantis will be Trump's vice president at the end of the day. If you were to ask me, I would say like a year back from now, I would say definitely Ron DeSantis. But as of right now, no. It becomes more and more unlikely as we get closer to the primaries that Ron DeSantis will not become Donald Trump's vice president, whether you like it or not. So now for Nikki Haley, I think Nikki Haley makes a good choice or I would say she's pretty much average. I would say she's pretty much decent, somewhere in the middle. I don't think she's horrible, and I don't think she's, I would say, one of the best. I would put her in average, so C tier for Nikki Haley. And the reason why, if Trump does pick Nikki Haley, I think number one is that she will be a good debater, especially Kari Lake too. I think number one, Kari Lake and Nikki Haley would both be good debaters for Kamala Harris. So I think one reason that Donald Trump would pick Nikki Haley, or I would say even Kari Lake, is to debate Kamala Harris. And I think that's the main reason why he would pick them, because I think they would be good debaters against Kamala Harris, especially Kari Lake and Nikki Haley as well. And that's the only reason why I see Nikki Haley or Kari Lake being Trump's vice president, is to debate Kamala Harris. I think that's the only reason why he would pick them. Otherwise, they're pretty much, I would say, average. And now moving on to the next tier, the B tier, which is, I would consider good fits for Donald Trump's vice president. We have Glenn Youngkin. I think Glenn Youngkin is a good fit or an excellent fit for Donald Trump's vice president or running mate. And same goes for Tulsi Gabbard, who actually switched from being a Democrat to an independent. And also we have Vivek Ramaswamy, who is not on this slide, but let's just count him. So let's start off with Vivek Ramaswamy. I think if he does end up being Trump's vice president or running mate, I think that has to do with the fact that he's just an outsider, and Trump likes, I would say, outsiders. I think Donald Trump hates the establishment politicians that's been in politics for a long time, and Trump is more of an outsider person, so he's definitely not going to pick someone who's been in politics for a very long time. Trump is definitely going to pick someone as his running mate who's definitely an outsider, and that's why I think Vivek Ramaswamy is a good fit. Other than that, him being an outsider, I think that's the only reason why. And next, we have Glenn Youngkin. I think Glenn Youngkin will be effective. I think the areas that Glenn Youngkin will be effective in, if he is Donald Trump's running mate, is getting the independent support. I think independent support in key battleground states, especially when it comes to Arizona, which majority of the voters are independent, I would say. I think Glenn Youngkin would definitely help Trump win it. And for other states as well in general, I just think Glenn Youngkin comes in handy when it comes to independence, and main reason why he won Virginia in the first place. So I think Glenn Youngkin is an excellent fit. Now, I think Tulsi Gabbard will also be a good fit because Donald Trump has praised her, number one, for leaving the Democratic Party. I mean, she's not a Republican, but she's still an independent, and she's been on Fox News, and I think she's growing on Donald Trump, definitely. I think he's considering it, but will he pick her is the question. I'm not sure yet, but I can definitely tell you Tulsi Gabbard is a good fit because she uses common sense a lot. She's big on common sense, and I think that would be good for Donald Trump, him personally. But we just have to wait and see. And now, what y'all been waiting for, the number one pick that I have for Donald Trump's running mate is Lee Zeldin, candidate for governor of New York. Lee Zeldin, back in 2022 midterms, barely lost his governor's bid for New York. And keep in mind, I said barely. He lost New York by 5%. By 5%. Hear me out. 5%. New York, we're talking about. A solid blue state. Lee Zeldin coming that close goes to show you that he will do well with Democrats. And I think where Lee Zeldin will be extremely effective for Donald Trump's running mate is stealing independent supporters from Biden and also stealing Democrat supporters from Biden as well. And I think Lee Zeldin will steal votes from Biden in New York, especially, causing Donald Trump to do better within the popular vote, which comes in handy as well. I mean, you don't need the popular vote, but I think Lee Zeldin, being Trump's running mate, will steal voters from Biden, especially in New York, will help Trump with the popular vote. And I think Lee Zeldin really comes in handy. And I think he's the number one pick for Donald Trump. I think he's number one in terms of actually helping Donald Trump win in 2024. But when it comes to Donald Trump actually picking Lee Zeldin, the likelihood of that, I would say, is pretty much a decent chance. But from all we know as of right now, Donald Trump is considering Kari Lake. But I mean, we're still too early from now, so we'll see. But as of right now, the number one pick, if I'm Donald Trump, I'm going for Lee Zeldin. Let me know if you agree with that. Lee Zeldin. And let me know your opinions in the comment section down below.